Good morning, bon dia, buenos dias, benvinguts, y welcome to Barcelona. I hope that you are enjoying this amazing Smart City Expo World Congress. There are many things in this event this year, and we are here talking about the future, about how cities are dreaming the future of, specifically, of the mobility. I am Oscar Chamat. I am the co-producer of a podcast about innovation in cities, and also I work for the City Council of Barcelona, thinking in how the mobility of the cities will be and why the mobility will have to change in the next few years. And it's very exciting here to be with Mar and with Esther, because they are from probably different worlds, but that they come together in the same place. The idea here is to talk about what's going on in cities. Why should cities change, and how can they change? In the podcast and in many places, I talk with cities, and all of them are asking, why should I change my mobility? How should I change the mobility? And what kind of mobility we will have in the future? That's the main three questions we would like to address with Esther and Mar. And please feel free to ask the questions. At this moment, I invite you to share what are your questions, your previous questions, your expectations about these sessions. If anyone has any questions at this moment, please raise your hand. No? Everybody's clear for everyone? That's great. Okay. First, we will have 5 minutes for Esther, 7 minutes for Martu. First will be Esther. Esther Anaya. She has dedicated more than 15 years to cycling mobility as an advocate consultant, and more recently moving into academia. She believes that in a different way to move and transport, more aligned with environmental, health, economic, and social needs. Her training, practice, and expected experience have helped her to create and design, collaborate, and contribute to projects for sustainable and equitable mobility transitions. Esther, welcome to this stage, and tell us, what are you doing?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for coming here to listen to us. We hope that you will also pose some questions, interesting themes that are in your mind, and that we can help and collaboratively find not maybe the solution, but yes, a dialogue about it. So I'm a researcher at Imperial College London. I'm finishing my PhD on cycle planning, cycle policies, and their impact on well-being. And on top of that, I've been for many years a cycling mobility consultant, and several of my latest jobs have been around regulations. And I suppose you all know the new introduction, disruption in mobility that the e-scooters have been proposing over the last years, the dockless bike shared systems, all of that have been themes that I've been working on. And also the regulation in general of cycle mobility, especially in Spain at local level, because in other countries the mobility for cycling in urban areas is regulated at a national level, but in Spain it's the municipalities who have to make really an effort and regulate cycling mobility at their level. And as you may imagine, every country, every town, every city, every metropolitan area is different. So it's a challenge to put together regulations for cycling in that way. So add upon that and maybe start focusing in one specific thing that concerns me, is my worry about linking regulations with the values that move them. So I like to think about regulations that are guided by specific values. In the case of cycling, I generally talk about three things. I talk about cycling as being a vehicle, but a very special vehicle. It's a vulnerable vehicle. You're not surrounded by metal, as in other vehicles happens. That would be actually the second principle, because the first principle is that pedestrians are first, because they're even more vulnerable than cyclists. So in regulations, those Two principles need to guide us, and the third one is that the benefits of cycling makes us promote it, cycling upon other things, other options that may be more polluting, less healthy, less environmental, etc. So those three things we really need to take into account when we think about regulations. And they have been moving my work when I think about how to regulate not only bicycle mobility infrastructure, but also the new systems that we're seeing, the dockless bikes, the e-scooters, etc. So I don't know if that is. I have a couple of minutes more to maybe talk you through what I'm doing about in my PhD. I'm assessing the impact of cycling infrastructure in cycling behavior. So seeing how people change their minds, how their attitudes, how their behaviors change, and an interesting result that I get from there, after putting in a lot of different variables, including road safety, is that comfort is very important. And I would like to bring this to you today for us to think what comfort means and how do we translate it into regulations. It seems that people want to be comfortable in their movements. So what does it mean? What does it mean to integrate that in regulations? And also linked to the three principles that I was stating before, one about the vulnerability, the prioritization of the pedestrians, the second about the bicycle being a vehicle, but a special vehicle, and the third one, the bicycle being beneficial for the individual and the environment and the collective, and thus needing to be promoted. So yeah, I think that's my opening remarks to share with you.
Thank you. It's working. Thank you, Esther. You finished. You talk about probably the most the thing that is appear in almost every city. That is the bikes. Is the new green, no? In some way, is the new black. The bikes. And let's talk about how innovation applies to the cars, to the other side of the public space. For that reason, we have Alarcon Batlle. She's founder and CIO of Social Capital.
Sorry?
Social car.
Social Car, sorry, Social Car. The first P2P car sharing platform in Spain, and also partnered at 19N Strategies, public policy firm for disruptive companies. Mar, welcome.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be at the Smart City Congress in my city, in Barcelona. Yeah, as you said, I'm the founder and CEO of Social Car. That is the first platform of peer-to-peer car sharing in Spain. What we do, well, we launched in 2011, so we faced many challenges in regulatory terms as well. And what we do, we are marketplace. On one side, we have a fleet that is owned by private car owners, so from the people, from the citizens. And on the other side, we have people who want to move around. So when we started, this activity was not regulated, and we didn't know about the impact of that, but we as you said, Esther, about regulation also always has principles. I have to say that private companies, we also have our values and our principles when we launch something disruptive. And at that time, what we were convinced is about replacing private cars on the streets, because of people will be rethinking and rethinking how to move around. So we start empowering people to rent their own cars, that are the second most expensive asset in a house, and we were empowering them to earn money with a car, and they start rethinking when they are going to use it or not, because if they have rentals, they are going to use public transport. And after years, what we have seen is that those people who started renting the car, many of them, they realize that they don't really need a car in the city, and they sell the car. 60% they buy a new car, but 40% they don't buy a new car. And they, go to the other side of the platform, and they start being renters, people who is renting their neighbor car when they need them. So now, after 8 years, we are convinced that that we are, helping cities to be a better place to move on, and we are replacing private cars with the shared use of the car. But when we talk with administrations, the only thing they have is to avoid and to eliminate private cars from the streets. And I said, yeah, but why not rewarding these people who already changed their minds renting their own car? Because leading and managing a fleet for car sharing is very expensive. We have seen cases of car sharing companies leaving cities because it's not, they cannot achieve benefits. So why not empowering people to share their cars? This is the first challenge we had. And recently we started with a ride-hailing service in Barcelona. And in spite of the restrictive regulation we have, I don't know, people that are not from Barcelona maybe is not aware of that, but here you need 15 minutes pre-booking for having access to a black cab, BTC, we're sitting here, and you have to wait for 15 minutes. You have on your hand a smartphone when you can ask a car, you have an on-demand service, but you have to wait for 15 minutes. And this is because there's an industry, there's a taxi industry, and is being protected by the administration. And one of my petitions is to regulate with a long-term vision, not only all the time. No, the discussion is around a protective regulation, a restrictive regulation, and it's time to move on and think on long-term, because on long-term we will have autonomous cars or things more challenging, and we will face again obsolete regulations.
Obsolete regulations. Probably all that we work with cities, we have sometimes that feeling that everything is old, or probably is not the moment to do something. Many cities that are here are from Africa, Latin America, everywhere. They will think, okay, I have to innovate in my cities. I have to create a new way of moving in my cities. But I don't know how should I change, which one will be the first step to change my mobility. If one city that are here come to you and ask you, okay, I want to put bikes on my streets, I want to put a new model of sharing the cars, which one should be the first step to do that? I mean, where should it start, Esther? I mean, should they change and buy the new fleet of bicycles or new fleet of cars? Should they liberate the streets for any car parking on the streets, or on the contrary, they have to be more conservative? Which one should be like a step by step?
For me, I would like to pick up on something that Mar was saying about the long-term effects, right? So in regulations, it's very commonly the strategy that people use is like, okay, we've got a new mobility system coming in, either if it's an e-scooter, the autonomous vehicle, the flying car, whatever. And what the regulation tries to do is see what can this vehicle or device can do, what are their needs, and then from there, in the regulations put, okay, this is what they can do, this is what they cannot do. But I would like to switch into another view and reflect about the use of space. So the idea then would be of a regulation to look into space and see, okay, this is the space that we have, right? This is our shared space, it's public space. Everyone needs to share it and needs to use it for different uses, not even only mobility, right? So in this space, what do we want to happen? And then look into the different vehicles, actors, etc., that play the game in that space, and then sort out the regulations, thinking about what do we want to happen in that specific space and the different spaces that are there, the sidewalk, the road, parking spaces. I think all of that is now, for me, the challenge to make it long-lasting as well, because no matter which vehicle or which apparel comes next, we will have very clear what we want to happen in the streets, yeah? So for me, that's the reflection that it's a challenge. With all the new things coming in, we really need to sit and take a moment to think, okay, we have this space, yeah? It's not only about actors and new apparels and things coming in. That would be a reflection, yeah.
I think that is very nice what you say, but in a mobility sector, that everything changed so fast. I mean, 6 months ago, Uber has to leave Barcelona, but 5 months and a half ago, social cars appear here. So sometimes it's very difficult to think what's going on in the place. So it's easy to say.
Yeah, I can give you an example. So we used to say disruption is the new normal in mobility. Yeah, that's what we're living in the last years. Disruption is the new normal, and city councils find from one day to the other day things going on. Yeah, a fleet of bicycles on their sidewalks, whatever. And going back to my point, if that municipality has very clear what do they want their public space to be used, like norms of public space, the civic regulations as well, and they have it very clear, no, this is forbidden, the private use of public space in this situation is forbidden already from our regulations. They've set up a baseline, right? If you know what I mean. And whatever it comes, they do have that baseline quite clear, and they can build on that. But for me, that's the key. And of course, those who don't have that baseline, it would be the first step is building it up. There were cities, they didn't have that baseline, and they couldn't manage the situation. I remember, I won't mention any city, but in the south of Spain, they find out 5 operators of bike sharing, dockless bike share, in the space of 2 months. So how do you regulate that? It's really difficult, right? And the companies wouldn't even establish any dialogue. So if you have a deadline, a baseline in which these companies, they need to play with, to start with, they will have to have some limitations, if you know what I mean. Yes, so for me, yeah, that's even the previous space then. Step 0, baseline regulations on public space. Yeah.
Okay. Step 0, Mar.
Yeah, what I think is that I agree with Esther, but I think that what is absolutely necessary is a collaboration and cooperation in between public and private sector. Because, as you said, no, the public space must be regulated. I completely agree, but you have on the other side private operators or private companies with values and also with benefit on their minds and having revenues on their minds, and they can do very good. They can manage really efficient bike fleets or scooter fleets or car fleets or whatever. And then for this reason, it's really important to talk together and to know who wants what you want, what you need, and what are you looking for. And if we all have the same why we are doing that, then it has to be easy to arrive to a efficient regulation. I mean, so what the city has to do is to regulate public spaces and to maintain the cities in good shape. And companies, we have our why, and in terms of platforms is to transform mobility and to make it more efficient. So let's talk together and let's have a dialogue, because if not, what we find is not a good result. And what I mean is in some cities there's a kind of obsession about managing services, not only regulating space, also on managing their own mobility services. I'm not talking about public transport, but bike fleet or whatever. So let's talk together, because sometimes the perception it's a kind of restriction of everything, and at the end, who is suffering that is the citizen, because you mentioned Uber. Uber left the city. The law became very restrictive. But how many people is using Uber? Until Uber left the city, there's more than 2 million openings of the application in Barcelona, and Uber is not here. So there's other operators, but we are operating with some restrictions. So let's think together with the citizen and the use of that mobility. Why people is using that? And we are offering efficiency. So let's put all in the same, in the same table.
You both mentioned recently people, citizens, and it's necessary to talk, to think about what are the real needs of the people or the citizen in every space. So, but how to include them in that discussion? I mean, are they, is okay, they are there, and as a city I offer this and they will choose it? And going one step beyond, do you think that the people nowadays, they are choosing sharing mobility or are they choosing vehicles? I mean, if I use, and the user of the social car is the same that the bike sharing, are we using bikes or are we using a service?
Yeah.
And it leads also, if you want to think about it, to talk about it, is about the cities. Are the cities, are the end of the cities understanding that the end of the cities is just a manager of services, platform of services, or are they managing vehicles and things are moving around the house, around the cities? Mark, what do you think?
So I think that now the citizen is using an intermodal mobility. So we are using, it depends what you are going to do. You pick a bike or a scooter or a car or whatever. So what the citizens really like is to have many options. And this is what is bringing richness to the ecosystem, having many options of mobility. But as one thing you mentioned, what I think, what platforms we have is data on what citizens do when moving around. So this is another reason to cooperate together with the public sector, because one thing that we can offer is what really people do and what really people want to do when choosing options of mobility. And I'm not talking about giving personal data, of course, but we have encrypted data and we know about interest and when you are picking one thing or another, and putting this in the same, over the same space, on the same table. It's very interesting for public administrations to regulate. In fact, yesterday, RAC, that is our partner here in Barcelona, launched the Mobility Institute. That it's just having this scope of having all the information of platforms, users, citizens, who is using who, why, when, and this is very powerful for regulators.
Yeah, I can, if I go back to the difference between the user and of a private vehicle and the user of a shared vehicle, we've done some work in the Observatory of Bike Sharing in Spain, which I represent and take part from, and we've been running for a number of years now. And we did a survey to actually see what was the difference between the people who ride a bicycle that is private, that is owned bicycle, and people who ride shared bicycle schemes. We ran a survey, and I won't say to our surprise, because we were suspecting, that's why we run the survey, that both identities overlap. So that's another very interesting thing, that we are not in silos anymore. We are not only a cyclist or a user of public transport or a driver. We are all of them, and we have everything maybe in one car, in the mobile phone. So we have to change our minds with that. We found in our survey that a third of the users of bike sharing were also using their own bicycles. Not only that, but we found that users of private bicycles, owned bicycles, after seeing more bike sharing in the streets, they use their private bicycle more. So there are synergies there that are really interesting in terms of, in this case, cycling, because it's an emerging thing. And the fact of seeing more people around you cycling, of course, motivates you to cycle more and normalizes cycling. So in the case of cycling, that division is not that clear. And it's not only, so to say, good to think about in these terms, but also it's good to think that they overlap because the synergies are positive. So I think we need to break that thinking of you are this, I am that, you are different from me, you don't understand what I do, or I need to offer separate services. Sometimes we need to think about integrating services much more. And things like that. I think this is the following step to that.
The following step probably is to change our mindsets, not only from the public, but also from the private, that understand that talking each other is necessary. I would like to have to see the audience. If anyone has a question, a comment, please.
Hello, very interesting everything you're saying. I just had a question, and I apologize already if it's a little bit naive, because I don't know so much about regulations, but I think it's a very interesting topic. But I've been wondering, since I was studying with data, why, or maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that for example, in Barcelona, my city, they give new licenses to share scooters, shared bicycles, shared foot scoots. A lot of new licenses come up. So I guess there's a negotiation between the private companies and the public sector and the city council. But I've never heard, or I think the city council has never actually suggested or proposed to put a condition to the private companies to actually share the data, which is probably the most interesting byproduct of, say, eCultra or all these companies that are sharing a lot of bikes, or even your company. If that information you have on on movements in the city was shared with the city council, I think it could be a good understanding, because it's very useful information not only for the city council but for the citizens to develop, or projects, and they would be like, you would be giving something that is useful to them, so they could be allowing some of these services and getting some return from that. I don't know if that exists anywhere.
That is not a naive question. Probably is the most tricky question I have heard.
Yeah.
But Esther.
Yeah. Go.
I can start again with the case of cycling. This is part of the guidelines that, for example, the European Cyclists Federation and other overarching institutions and advocacy groups for cycling have posed for the city councils that receive this demand or found bicycles the following day, that you need to ask them to share the data at least. What happens is, on my view, is that for some of these municipalities is the first time they see that kind of data. They don't have the knowledge or the resources to manage it. So I agree with you, it's absolutely very important to be transparent and share the data, but then we need to empower in some way or find new ways of collaboration or go beyond just sharing the data and integrate indicators of evaluation to say, okay, with this data, auditing and everything, you need to tell us what is going on, because we don't have more money to put into figuring out what to do with this data. So there is also, not all the cities are a big city like Barcelona, and this is happening in many other cities. So I would also like to raise that question, that it's not only in big cities that these disruptions are going on, it's in smaller cities, they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough knowledge, and I think even these kind of agreements need to go beyond that. And that is, of course, the basic transparency, but then what do we do with that data? Yeah. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, in fact, in Barcelona City Council, it does exist different tables of conversations for bikes, cars, and motorbikes. There's not for scooters, foot scooters, and that's also a question why. And but there's tables of discussion in between public and private sector. But what we find, what we arrive there, is that they have the public sector. They have their own studies about what citizens do. And sometimes you don't agree with the results. That is quite funny. And yeah, we are open to share this data, because it's the real information. The data comes from the platforms, but they have to ensure on the other side that they are going to do a good use of that data, because sometimes maybe they say, oh, how many users you are having hundreds of thousands of revenue, so I'm going to tax you for whatever. So we need to stay on the same level and to have the same why, and because of not, it's very difficult to share information and very risky for platforms.
There is one. I'm sorry. There are two more words over here and there. Yes, please. Just I want to highlight one first conclusion. We are talking about regulatory challenges. Probably the first regulatory challenges every city has is how to manage the data. Probably is that where everything could start. Probably I propose that as a first conclusion, what to do. And also that the data probably is the answer, but we don't know many times the question.
Yes. Hi, I'm Harold from Stavanger, Norway. We're like 150,000 inhabitants, and we just put down some pretty strict regulations on e-scooters, actually saying that if you want to have services in our town, you have to open up the data. But now I'm watching how this department is trying to receive that data, and as you say, they doesn't necessarily have the competence on how to receive that data. But I've got another question, and that's what you pointed out, is that we shouldn't have like regulations on how we do stuff, but more on what kind of effect we want to achieve. But then again, how do we make such nice regulations on effect, on the impact that we want to achieve?
We then go to enforcement, which is another very tricky area, isn't it? Yeah, I would say there's, in my experience, what I've observed in the processes that I've been working on with regulation is that it's very important to train the enforcers of the regulation about the regulation and the why the regulation, yeah? Not only what the text says, you know, because they know very well, they can read it and they can, if they have the resources, enforce it, but also let them know why is that like that. You know, for cycling, I'm not going to get into the debate, but there's a lot of debate about the helmet, right? So if you make the helmet compulsory, we know no one's going to cycle. Yeah, the numbers are going to drop. And the most important thing is look at the integrative effect on health, on every aspect on health, not only on prevention of certain types of accidents, which of course a helmet can be useful, but across all health and well-being levels. And the impact is massive due to physical activity, due to many other things that cycling can provoke. But if you don't explain that to the policeman that is placing the fines, that is very tricky. So yeah, I would go into the enforcement part of it. And for me, the blind spot is training the people who enforce them. Once you have, of course, that's the end of the pipeline, actually. So once you have developed the regulations, you need to communicate them and train these people to enforce them in the correct way, so that, because they are the ones who are on the street level. So you want them to really know what they're doing. That's one thing that I've observed in my experience. Yeah. Really good question.
Mar.
I agree. Yeah, well, it's a good point that you were talking about enforcement, because sometimes in Barcelona, for example, we don't still have a regulation for e-scooters. There's a very obsolete regulation that is defining an e-scooter as a thing that is not, or is not now, but there's enforcement. So, this regulation and enforcement has to go by hand, because if not, it's quite chaotic, like now.
There is one more. There is one more here, and later.
Hi, thank you. My name is Florencia, and I wanted to ask, in terms of equity, what I've seen in general is that the service providers for this new urban mobility is concentrated in areas that have two characteristics. On the one hand, they are already very well served by, for example, public transportation, or have urban characteristics that promote walking and cycling. So, and on the other side, these areas of the city are of a certain social level. So, should regulation promote or enforce or restrain the new urban mobility to these areas that don't have other alternatives, and for people that cannot afford cars or cannot connect themselves to the public network?
That's a tricky question, a social question, not technical one.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that question, because I'm writing at the moment 2 papers and co-editing 2 special issues on that specific aspect of micromobility, is equity and justice of micromobility. On a paper that I'm doing, I'm looking into the territorial aspect of it. So basically physical accessibility. So who has access and who doesn't have access. So that's one way of looking at it, because we realize that not everyone has access. Actually, one of the papers is about Barcelona. So probably in a couple of months it will be out and we will have results there. But I can advance you that the rich people had more access to stations of bike sharing than the poor, even in slopey areas, because Barcelona has a higher area and a lower area. So we even looked at that, controlled for hilliness. And we saw that in the richest neighborhoods, there was much more access, right? And it's not the only city that happens that. I've been looking into that in Brazil and in other cities of collaborators in our special issues. It's really interesting issue at the moment. So I really thank you for that question. We don't have any answer yet, but there is a suspicion of course, political interest, vested interest into putting stations in certain places rather than other. And many times, and this is a question that is very, I don't know if you have it as well, Mar, but many times in cycling and in bike sharing, we talk about vandalism a lot, and we relate vandalism to, poor areas, and then people, companies don't want to put stations in poorer areas because they think they're going to be vandalism, and then they're underserved because of that. And actually, I would really look into vandalism as well, because I think it's quite manipulative concept, the bike sharing, the dockless bike share into the canals in the UK, and they blaming the citizens. It was not only that, it was an element that was for, not at the access and not available for everyone, and that created social unrest. So we need to really look into these processes and sometimes even go beyond just the mobility system and see what's going on at a social level. And profiles, gender profiles, really interesting, not only poverty and disability, another huge issue. Who has access to shared mobility with disabilities or not, and to the space, yeah? So these are really, really important issues, and we are building now the measurements, the instruments, the tools to measure it. We don't have it under control yet, so this is an open issue at the moment, yeah.
Esther, you open a very interesting topic for Mar, because you include inclusion, vandalism, many things. What are your reflections about this? Together with this, with inclusion, because when you start using the share economy, the first thing you think is what's going on to happen with my car.
Well, answering this question, and with everybody thinks when you are explaining people that someone is sharing their own car to other, the first question is, and they are going to steal the car? What is happening with those cars? They are destroying the cars, crashing the cars? No, the answer is no. We are not as bad as we think we are. And I have to say that the incidents in social car, in our platform, are less than 1% of the rentals. And this is including traffic fines. So it's really, really very low. And so in terms of sharing your own stuff, people is behaving better when it's using the car from another person than when they are using their own car. And this is something that it's already really experienced. So, we don't have these problems of vandalism.
Really nice.
Mar, and regarding the inclusiveness, do you have any thought about the richer neighborhoods, the poorer neighborhoods? Do you have any reflection of that?
Yeah, well, when we launched our service, what we thought is that people with less social economic resources will be our first users. And what we discovered, it was that was completely the opposite. The people that was sharing their own car was people that was living in the richest areas in the city. And this was quite surprising. But it's people that understood faster the benefits of sharing your own car.
Okay, that's great. There was another one.
Hello, my name is Javier Valiente. I come from Political Intelligence, public affairs firm. We're operating in the mobility sector in different European cities since a few years ago. I would like to ask you about, do you think one of the key challenges of regulation and mobility will be to try to find a common regulatory framework, at least at national level, for the regulation of these services? Because obviously these services competences belong to the local authorities, but many companies, particularly startups, moving into this market, find themselves with different regulatory initiatives. Each municipality is testing or is going into different directions. It's very difficult for a company to adapt to the different regulations and try to survive and grow in that environment. So do you think one of the challenges should be to look for these common regulatory frameworks, at least regulatory sandboxes in which different local councils could operate, exchange initiatives, and try to look for similar, at least, standards going into the same direction. Thank you.
Mar, we were talking about that before, about these kind of scales, no?
Yeah, well, the challenges we have startups when launching these disruptive services, mobility services, is that running a platform it's really expensive. So you need to have revenues as soon as possible, because you're managing a fleet or you have a software. So. And again, we need these sandboxes in terms of designing a framework of public policy. We need this because it's what is ensuring our growth. So we cannot, it's necessary to be in constant contact with administration, and what we used to do is to show them what benefits we are achieving for citizens, what benefits are we offering when using this sharing mobility options, and it's again going back to this challenge of being on the same page, because of not is going against your value, and your company, and it's
Esther?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the different speeds of the regulation change, that it goes slower and slower the higher you go. So to change a national regulation takes a lot of time. And some of the dynamics we're talking about happens from one day to the other. And how do you scale them up? I know municipalities are making a great pressure after, this dialogue, these conversations with the new enterprises. They really want to change it. But I think that's a challenge, because the speed of the change is up there, and the politics of it, so the 4-year, legislatory year cycle of 4 years, and then the chaos that we have in some countries doesn't contribute to fast changes in regulation. And in the case of cycling, we've been wanting to change the circulation, that's how it's called, traffic and circulation regulation, for a lot of years, and we haven't even managed to this point. So imagine when we talk about e-scooters, how long is it going to take? And I don't know now, but a few months ago, I looked into the regulations of e-scooters in Europe at a European level. There were still no regulations at European level. It was considered a toy. So there was not even considered that they could have a motor, they could get to some speeds, and it didn't make any sense. It was not realistic at all. And so, this is one of the challenges we definitely have. It would be great to have it, but I think it takes time to get there. Yeah.
Any other question? I would like to, both of you, especially Esther, mentioned the scooter, the new evil on the market, no, in some way. What do you think from your point of view about the scooters in the city? How should we regulate them? Are they part of the solution? Are they part of the problem? Should be at home? I mean...
That's an easy question. Well, I think it's necessary to at least to define them, at least in Barcelona, and to have a framework, a regulatory framework, because now it's quite chaotic. And what happened is that people is owning their own scooter. So is what I said at the beginning. So what we have to look at is what citizens are doing, what they want, and they don't have scooter sharing in they don't have platforms. Well, in fact, there's 2 platforms now trying to operate in Barcelona, but we don't have now big companies, and what happened is that people they bought their own scooter, and then bike lanes in Barcelona now are chaotic. You have electric scooters, you have electric bikes, you have mechanical bikes, you have everything. So it's necessary to advance and what you said, the speed in between companies, how we grow and how public administration is regulating, it's really, really asymmetric. And you need to put rules. If not, people is going to buy a scooter and going by a scooter anyway.
Esther?
absolutely regulate them. I've been working on that in different cities in Spain. But I think we also need to think if it's happening for a reason. Not everywhere is happening at the same level, but at least in Barcelona, it's really a boom. And I think if it happens, on my view, it's because we haven't managed to provide decent services and infrastructures for cycling. So then people who would cycle, people who would use the public space in a specific way, they don't find they're comfortable there. And I go back to my thesis calculations with the concept of comfort. And the moment they get something that it's, they can take with them, and it takes them fast from A to B, and all that stuff that actually the bicycle does, and does better and safely. Not these devices, unfortunately, I think they're not safe at the moment, and they can't be, because you're just holding a stick and moving, sometimes at 40 kilometers per hour. So how can that be safe,
Sure. Yeah.
So if you think about it like that, but it's happening. So if it's happening, it's for a reason. I'd like to think as well, of course, regulating, and there are a few ways of regulating them, categorizing them, putting into categories depending on the dimensions, on the motor, on the strength they have and whatever, and where do we put them. If they go into the cycle lanes, they cannot go into the sidewalk, but who can go on the road? All of that questions are raised in the regulations and try to regulate it. But for me, it's also interesting to see it like, okay, let's observe this, what's going on, and then observe also the bigger picture of mobility. If this is happening, it's because those people cannot move in a different way that might be more beneficial. Let's do what we need to do to get these people moving in a healthier way for everyone, for themselves and for everyone.
Yeah, and here not having a regulation, the problem is that there's scooters, at 45 kilometers per hour. So regulate and establish a maximum kilometer per hour, and leave a sharing scooter platform to put their scooters that they are accomplishing all the obligations the public administrations are writing on. So because now it's chaotic. It's chaotic.
Definitely.
Any question? If not, I will continue doing questions, though. I don't have problems. We have talking about theories, framework, sandbox, many theoretical way of thinking. If you will have to share, to select or to point out some cities, some best practices in regulations, which one, where? Is any place that are doing interesting things? Mar?
You're the researcher.
But you are the business person, and that's more, sometimes even more interesting.
For me, I will be in all cities. But Esther,
I'm not
good examples.
going to do advertising of the cities I've actually been helping. But the best examples I've seen were those, and I go back to a previous point I've made, those who had already regulations on the public space, the use of public space, the behavior of users of the public space, And it's not only for mobility. In Barcelona, for example, the public space is privatized in many ways without us even realizing, las terrazas in verano, al fresco, tables from the restaurants and bars. Okay, this is privatization of public space. So are we allowing that? That is in the bylaws, in the ordenanzas, in the municipal laws. So we need to start rethinking what we're doing with the public space, really. And I think the cities who have that clear and that work that really well, I see them controlling better the situation. And I think Barcelona is kind of doing that as well. It has controlled it. I've seen cities with chaos going on and accidents, and in London it's forbidden the e-scooters. It's a very old regulation that forbids them going anywhere that is not private paths, but people still use them, and there has been, unfortunately, people that had died on scooters in London, even when they were forbidden. So the legibility of the city, like how do we design the city, how do we prepare the city so that people read what they would be doing there, what they feel like doing that, is very important. We have examples in Barcelona. We have Les Superillas, for example. Those are spaces that we have a legibility of sharing the space in peace, in respect, etc. And I think the regulations can help produce that. if they allow it. They first have to allow it. Yeah.
Mark, do you something to say about that?
Yeah, well, I think that you need a combination of good regulation and also good infrastructures. Because, for example, in Madrid, we have good examples of regulating mobility in Madrid, but if you try to bike there, it's impossible. You don't have bike lanes, you don't have... Also, regulations are obsolete in some cases, but also spaces sometimes are obsolete. So cities were designed for cars, for going by car, and now we want to put bikes, we want to put scooters, we want to put motorbikes. So we need a combination of having a good infrastructure and having also a good regulation, and then leaving platforms to operate also in good terms.
If you have to say to any city mayor, any politician at this scale, why should we put bikes on the streets, or why should we have a car sharing system, a social car in our city? Which one could be the, hey, it's obviously that this is my improvement to the mobility of the city? Where could you find the elevator pitch of the social car for a city council?
Well, but it's obvious because it's rationalizing the use of private cars. In our case, yeah, we are using private cars, but this is also helping having less private cars. I'm not imagining a city without private cars. That's impossible. I cannot imagine a city like this. You need to have a huge infrastructure and to move people around, because people want the freedom to move around. So, and then what we need to do is to combine all the options and have as many options as we can. And yeah, this is a little bit the pitch for a mayor. And yeah, what I would like to say, and I said sometimes to our mayor, is do your job. That is regulate, and yeah, your job is regulating. Your job is establishing the rules where we people, or we companies need to operate. But don't restrict, don't try to do yourself things that are not on your your scale.
Esther, why bikes in cities? If you get sweat, if you get contaminated, you can fail.
Yeah. Well, you've named them, but my elevator pitch, I think it's not very popular, because I would use two main connections with that, and in broader terms with all mobility-related issues. And one is the climate emergency, right? And the other one is the social emergency. And I think we cannot separate them. They're very interlinked in many ways. And when we act upon it, we're acting on the other as well. That is a challenge for us, researchers, policymakers, companies operating in this, because we really need to take those things into account and learn about them, learn the impact of them, and how can we contribute with our planning and with our policies and with our activities as companies. But for me at this moment is this link that we need to make between mobility, climate emergency, and social emergency. Yeah.
There is one word from Stavanger.
Hi, Harold from Stavanger again. I think we should rephrase the question. Is it like, why do we need cars in the city? So there is more spaces for walking and riding bicycles, and to get there, I think we have a good opportunity now, as it seems as in 2 or 20 or 40 years we're going towards driverless cars. I think that is a great opportunity to actually make sure that all cars should be shared, and so making sure that people are not actually driving their own private driverless cars. They've made a study in Oslo where they replaced all the private cars with autonomous cars, like a data study and modeling it, and then the numbers of kilometers driven by cars was increased by 10% because there are so many cars driving around empty, right? So, and if you start sharing it, it drops down to like 14, and if you're more than 2, it starts getting really, really interesting. And this is where I think the city should start, like playing around with the regulations and actually enforcing people to start using shared cars only, especially in the city centers, and to make sure that when we actually have the driverless cars, they will all be shared. So it's not a question, was it come?
Yeah. Well, why we need cars on the city, maybe to leave the city. No, as I said, if we arrive to have a huge infrastructure that it's allowing you not owning a car and going from A to B, that maybe B is up on the mountains, okay, we don't need cars in the city. But you, at least in cities like Barcelona, where people live in the city center, there's other cities where the distribution is different, but in Barcelona people live in the city center. If you want to go to the mountains where there's no public transport, so you need a car to go there. In spite, you have maybe an area outside the city where you can leave your own car there and access there very easy. So unless we have a huge infrastructure to go from A to B, we will need cars, but not as much cars as we have now. As I said, in our platform, there's people who realize that really don't need the car, and they sell the car, and they use the other options. But people who still need to go to places where they don't have access in another way, they need the car. And, well, ask the people in Barcelona who live the weekends. No?
From Stavanger again.
But if you got a good car sharing scheme, you don't need a car. I've got 3 kids. I live in a city with 7 shared cars, and I go to the mountains whenever I want.
Yeah, well, I defend this. You can own a car, but you can share it. Because also on the other side, the cost of managing a car sharing fleet, it's huge. So, yeah, also made this company on break even. So for this reason, we think that people sharing their own cars, it allows us to grow faster than owning a car sharing fleet. It's very expensive.
I'm supporting what you're doing. Social car, I think, is a very good
Thank you.
platform, and actually, it's true that the effect it has on making people not buy another car and just use rental, it's much bigger than the effect that it also has. That somebody asked you yesterday at the talk, somebody was like, "Are you not making it easier to actually use a car than to use the metro, and therefore polluting more?" Or yes, I think the answer is yes, I am, but I'm mostly making it a lot better to not buy another car and just use one of the ones that is in the street. Now, with what he says, I do agree with him though that I am actually the person who lives in Barcelona. I used to have a scooter, a Vespa, that was polluting. It broke down, and I decided I wouldn't buy another one because there's so many fleets.
It's full of them.
I can go anywhere. I can, so I don't need to have one, and that is not shared with peer-to-peer. That is companies that have their own fleet. So I think both models could work, but yours has the advantage of balancing itself, from the demand and offer.
But what I said is that those models need to be sustainable, to be long-term models, and most of them are not sustainable in terms of economics. So we need to be sustainable. For this reason, we don't buy cars. We don't have if we have to buy, as other companies do, they buy cars and pay for the parkings and pay for the insurance. The massive use of those cars, we need to be sustainable. It's incredible. So we are now at that point that we are still, evangelizing those services. Maybe in the future, we could manage company fleets, or car fleets, or motorbike fleets, and being sustainable. But now, ask the platforms. I think that there's no platform sustainable already.
I think that it's not sustainable that we still have 52 seconds. If you want to say some last words in 20 seconds, something that you say, okay, I have to say that idea about this speech. Esther, do you have something to say, or just thank you, or?
Thank you. Really interesting questions, so thanks everyone.
Okay. Mark, any idea?
Oh, thank you. It's very interesting. I think that we could be here talking for hours.
Yes, that's
very
great.
Interesting topic.
That's great. I was afraid to have a topic like this, talking between bikes and cars and talking about regulations. It's a little bit challenging, but also I think that we survive. We have some more questions. That is what is interesting here. Probably it's not coming for answers, but coming for new questions to face the urban reality. Thank you so much, and please enjoy your meal that you should be hungry, okay? Have a nice day and afternoon. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.